Are injuries ever an excuse for a football team not living up to expectations?
Sure, they're an excuse sometimes, but you frame that question within the context of Tennessee's injuries. Uh,
I do
yeah,
want to get to that.
okay.
But
So,
for instance, Aaron Rodgers getting hurt with the Jets in the fourth.
yeah, that's an excuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
then basically you're not going to achieve what you wanted to. So, Caleb, what are your thoughts on how often injuries can actually be a real reason, I guess I should say, and not an excuse? And then I want to get specifically to Tennessee.
Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis, but they can definitely be an excuse. I would say you guys both covered the 2002 Tennessee team. I think Philip Fulmer had an excuse that year because I think it was just a barrage. It was like 20 years of injuries rolled into one season in 2002. And
All right.
so they are.
Is it a fair reason for Tennessee having dropped a game and not playing at their best at various times? Austin Peay comes to mind. John, is that a fair reason or is that just an excuse?
I think it's more of an excuse. It's also a reason. Cooper Mays being out starting center, that affected Tennessee's offense, no doubt about that. But if it had lost to Austin Peay, you couldn't blame it on the absence of center Cooper Mays. And I don't blame the loss to Florida on the absence of Cooper Mays because every team incurs injuries. It's just part of football at the NFL level, at the SEC level, wherever. And this is a very physical league. When you lose a starting quarterback, that's when you're worried about your season being sabotaged by injuries. But there's sometimes, and Caleb brought up an example of the 02 team. I remember Tennessee's 04 team when its top two quarterbacks were injured, and it ended up playing in the SEC championship game with a third-string quarterback, Rick Clausen. So you would say, oh my gosh, there's no way Tennessee can win after losing two quarterbacks, and it still managed to do so. So, yeah, injuries can be an excuse, but for Tennessee, these injuries haven't been significant enough. Losing Keenan Pili, a linebacker, yeah, he was their best player at that position, and that hurts some. And losing Brew McCoy, that hurts the receiving core. But you can't say, oh my gosh, the season's over. You can't achieve your goals without those guys. I don't believe that. If that's the case, then your roster wasn't well fortified enough to begin with.
Okay, the second part of what you said is what I wanted to address. And Caleb, let me get to you. The roster is not fortified to where it should be. Now, that's a different argument, okay? But I think injuries with this team are an excuse for why they have one loss, because I think they win at Florida with Cooper Mays. I think Keenan Pili, even though they played fine without him, handled a lot of the defensive costs. I think Brew McCoy is a big deal because there is no way in this world that Nimrod Webb or Ramel Keaton are going to dictate coverage like a true number one receiver does. So it's not going to open things up on the other side. So if Tennessee were to lose 3 or 4 games this season, I think you have seen enough, Caleb, that you could point back to and you could say, always remember that 2023 season, they did have that bad run of injuries. I'm not saying it's time to go 6-6, but Caleb, I think they're to the point where it has to be factored in when we tell the story of this season moving forward.
The one area where I wouldn't factor it in, though, is I do put a lot of blame on Josh Heupel for this point not having had a backup center ready to go. And I think this is year 3, and he's put all his eggs in Addison Nichols being ready to go, and he clearly wasn't. So he was forced to volley lane. And I've been on this about Josh Heupel for a while. Josh Heupel, the play caller, no issues. Josh Heupel, the talent evaluator, it's like everybody's asking about Bill Belichick right now with New England and him struggling. I'm like, I don't think Bill Belichick, the coach, is the problem. Bill Belichick, the GM, is the problem. He's not making good personnel moves. And I think that is where the Cooper Mays injury is not an excuse. Because the reason it became a factor was Josh Heupel has not done what he needs to do to make sure there was a backup ready to go. The Brew McCoy injury, yes, he's a rare talent. I don't think that's an excuse either, though, because you have 3 other 4-star wideouts who you recruited. So if you can't find a replacement for Brew McCoy by this point, again, that's a talent evaluation issue. And that needs to be called out.
John, I think that the answer to my question will come pretty quickly. If they have the ability to turn in another Brew McCoy, as they did last year when Cedric Tillman got hurt, if Kalen Webb or Chaz Nimrod are one of those guys, then Tennessee's fine. I don't have any premonition that they'll be those type of guys, and so I guess largely my assertion, it remains to be seen, but I don't think they have another guy that's going to be able to move defensive secondaries around.
Well, again, that speaks to Caleb's point. You've got to think in terms of what happens if this happens. What happens if we lose this guy? What do we do then? It's not. Cooper Mays is you could say is an All SEC center. We say that on this show repeatedly. Brew McCoy is not an All SEC wide receiver. Keenan Pili is not an All SEC linebacker. I can cite other teams that have had more significant losses. Georgia, for example, lost a really key running back in Branson Robinson for the year. I think he would have been their leading rusher. McConkey has hardly played this season because of injury. He's their best wide receiver, an All SEC caliber receiver. And you can go on, you can look at any team. South Carolina, for all its problems, some of those were directly related to injuries in the offensive line. So I just don't think at this point Tennessee's injuries are that huge a contributor to what this team is. I don't think if we disagree on this. I think if Cooper Mays played against Florida, Tennessee would have still lost that game. Tennessee's defense was a problem in that game. And if you remember, quarterback Graham Mertz of Florida was playing with a hurt hand in the second half, and that affected, I think, the play calling for Florida, which was picking apart Tennessee's secondary in the passing game before that.
So what do you specifically on that, Caleb? What do you think if Cooper Mays plays? Does Tennessee beat Florida? Remind you that portions of the program brought to you by Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Enjoy life better when you see better. Local vision service for LASIK, cataract surgery, and regular eye examinations. ccteyes.com. ccteyes.com. I've had LASIK, no contacts, no glasses. Absolutely love it. So let me backtrack a little bit because I thought John and I agreed on that, but we don't. Do you think Tennessee beats Florida with a healthy Cooper Mays from the get?
Yeah, I break with John on that. I'm with you, Dave, because I think that one of the reasons Tennessee's defense, now, to be fair, Tennessee's defensive line, and I've said this for a while, the edge rushers didn't get off the bus that day either. I mean, Tyler Barron and Roman Harrison should have taken a long shower after that Florida game because they didn't bother to show up for that game. But I will say that part of the problem was after Florida scored that first touchdown, Tennessee had a 5-play drive, a 2-play drive, a three and out. And the reason was they couldn't run the ball at all. They averaged fewer than 4 yards a carry in that game. Jalen Wright himself was the best runner, and he averaged 3.5 yards a carry, I think. And I think this Tennessee defense plays off the offense getting a lead. And the longer you put them on the field, which the offense couldn't stay on the field in the first half, nor could they build a lead, the more things are going to unravel for that defense.
John, going back to your roster comment that there should be somebody behind them to just immediately step in. And when you saw Alabama at its best, it was like, oh, the Bryce Young guy is going to be great. He's probably going to win a Heisman. I mean, there was just no doubt for the longest period of time that they were going to plug and play. So we are in year 3, and there is a transfer portal. So should Tennessee fans be concerned at all about the player development as of late, but that the roster is not at an elite level if it's not what you suggested earlier?
Well, I think Tennessee has to be more aggressive and do a better job evaluating in the transfer portal. Looking ahead to the 2024 season, particularly addressing issues in the offensive line. We talked about this before, where there are a lot of seniors on this offensive line, including some as backups, that Tennessee has got to hit the portal really hard this offseason. And perhaps it will. You can't count on freshmen coming in and helping you greatly in that area. So, yeah, I think we expect teams to be good right away now, and Josh Heupel has done that. I still think what he did, I mean, he developed, there's been player development. I'm not necessarily knocking his player development. I think he took players that weren't doing anything under Jeremy Pruitt and won significantly. And they had great seasons. You look at those wide receivers in his offense last year. So, yeah, I think, but I still think the roster, there's more work to be done when you talk about, even though Tennessee made the top 10 last year, when you talk about competing for that playoff berth, there's still work to be done with the roster.
Travis says most transfers are only transfers because they don't play enough. You mentioned evaluating transfers, good for filling an immediate need. I don't know about you, John, but this channel has admitted, Caleb and I both admitted, we're probably a little too high on Dante Thornton. When you go back and look, he only had like 230 yards receiving, only got on the field because of an injury. To say that he's going to step in and be a Brew McCoy, who I think is going to be a special NFL talent one day, that's a little strong with Dante. I think we all got a little strong with Dante.
Well, I think there was a good reason for that. It was because the way coaches were talking about him in the offseason, they made him out to be the next Randy Moss. He's a freak. He's 6'5", 220, runs like the wind. You know, I've been thinking, will anybody even be able to tackle or catch him once he gets the ball? He's not quite that. I think his big year at Oregon was catching 24 passes. So maybe we should have looked at those stats a little harder. But you do get caught up, even though we know this is what coaches can do at times. We do get caught up in what they say. And when Joey Halsley is so lavish in his praise of Dante Thornton, you think, man, how's Squirrel White going to keep him off the field?
I was actually thinking that at one point.
Well, I mean, I understand why. And see, I'm a real proponent, and I know this transfer portal thing it's only been really significant in the last few years, but I'm really a big proponent of finding players at a lower level of play from the SEC who are really productive. I'd rather get an all-conference guy from the Mountain West than a guy who was just mediocre starting for Florida.
There we go. And we have Rocky Top Tom says, Thornton's effort stinks. He didn't say stinks. If you're on our YouTube channel, you'd see what he actually said because it's on the screen. Also, I agree with that, by the way. Michael Cooper says, when is Keenan coming back? That's a long-term injury. He doesn't have any eligibility left, so I think the goal is to get him in a game so that he can have some tape to show NFL teams more than he has now. But that tricep injury, don't expect him to be a major player until late in the year, maybe even the bowl game is what I'm told.